Gentlemen, I think we need to go to our second topic and the substance of our discussion that taken note of. Let's talk about what we have this evening, and I call it scratching the surface. Someone says it's a skin deep journalism. And to begin this, let's talk about the story that we're having tomorrow. The banditry crisis in the troubled Baringo County, that is, which has taken 5 months now, and the conversations of an end to the persistent clash over grazing land is far from over. Now, 24 people, as we have established, have so far been killed in violent battles between the Pokot and other communities. Residents are still reporting several others are missing. Now, despite heavy deployment of the police and Kenya Defense Forces to restore order, the perennial conflict that has plagued the region has made shocking headlines of death and, of course, destruction. Different administrations have relentlessly tried to resolve the issue with little success, but those on the front line say there is a solution. The problem is the government has got it all wrong. In an exclusive interview with the Pokot at the center of the conflict, they are known as the bandits. NTV's Dennis Okari, who's here with us, got access to their lifestyle and why they think banditry is far from over. Here's a sneak preview of that special feature that will be airing tomorrow.
Sasa nikaona hii kitu inaweza kuwa ng'ombe ama aniue. Nikatangulia nikaua. Nikapiga risasi ini. Yes, nilipika kichwa, nikapika katikati. Na hapa katikati tena.
Na unaipangia kuifanya nini sasa?
Naipangia kukula.
Na badala ya kula nyoka na kuna ng'ombe na mbuzi, mbona usikule mbuzi?
Sasa ng'ombe yote mara kwetu wamechukua, imebaki tu kiasi. Ndio nimeona heri ni survive na hii nyoka nikule kiasi. Ndio ni hiyo isae ikinyesha ndio itasaidia.
Na vile ambavyo serikali imekuja na jeshi imekuja, polisi pia nao wamekuja.
Serikali ndio wamekuwa wabaya. Kama ingekuwa hii mara kwetu na sisi tungekuwa tumekuwa na amani. Tungekuwa tumepika hawa, na unajua mtu akipikwa hata sisi tupikane na wewe saa hii kwa ngumi. Si unaweza pika mimi na niridhike na nikuwe rafiki yako. Bas, ni hivyo sasa tungewachiwa hawa, tupike kiasi mpaka waridhike na serikali waende.
Wapokota hawa hawana haja na shamba la mtu. Hawana haja hata na mtu. Lakini wao wanatafuta tu malisho ya ng'ombe na mbuzi.
Ni nini Wapokot huwa wanawashindia?
Kenya wanatushindia ni silaha.
Wako na silaha nyingi ama?
Wako na silaha nyingi na wako wengi.
Bunduki yenye tunauliwa hapa ni hii ya serikali yenye Ruto alileta. Sasa hakuna mtu siku ikida anaweza peana bunduki ati apee mtoto yake. Si uko na watoto wawili, unaweza pea mwingine bunduki na uambie apige ule.
Tunaomba serikali wafanye juu chini, wafukuse Pokoto waende kwao. Kila mtu na bondarisi yake.
A Pokot cannot initiate a problem. They only pay back what he has been done unto. So what the Pokot are doing is paying back unproportionally what they have been done unto.
Kwa hivyo huna imani kuwa jeshi hata vile polisi wameingia hapa watasuluhisha hii vita?
Sidhani. Hata wao walikuja kujaribu kuja kwa watu pale. Walipigwa marisasi kutoka kwa ile milima. Sasa mpaka hata wao wanajaribu kukimbia, yani kujiokoa maisha yao. Kama sasa watu wanapigwa risasi, mpaka risasi inatoa vumbi katikati yenu.
Mimi naona hii ni ujinga mtupu kabisa. Hii ni ujinga kwa sababu Wapokot, majority of the Pokots hawajaenda shule.
Right, that exclusive report coming on your way tomorrow at Dennis Okari, that's with double N, at Delano Kiilu, at Robert Nagila, Nagila, at John-Allan Namu, that is with double L. Also, join the conversation. The phone lines will be open shortly. Let's start with Dennis, your story. This is the kind of stories that makes us think. What have we been reporting, Dennis? What have we been talking about? We've been going in, getting the story out whenever there is an attack, and that's it. You decided to go down and look at the other side of the story. One, what made you do that? Because it's not what we see always. It happens, but it's not always what we see.
I think the the conflict in that area has been there for almost the last 12 years. That's almost 3/4 of my career. And each time I've watched this story, and each time we near elections and these stories come up, it's always the politicians, the elite, the professionals, who many journalists will go to and to get information on what exactly is happening on the ground. However, we have not had this real story of the fighters themselves. And my idea was, why don't we go to where we have the Pokot territory? Because in this case, they're the main aggressor. They're the ones being accused by the Chamus community, by the Tugen, by the Marakwets and the Turkana to be the main aggressors in this case. And we are all talking about the Pokots. But why not go and talk to the main actors, not talk to the leaders? And in my story, I've not interviewed any single leader from the area, any politician, because they will push their own agenda and their own narrative. But I want to talk to the bandit, that guy that you've just watched, and try to get into his mind. Does he understand why he's fighting? Is this a push for more grazing land? Or is it a question of leaders wanting to push more boundaries for their own political reasons? And I got some very, very interesting views talking to these warriors from both the Ilchamus community and from the Pokot community. The idea behind this conflict is one that can be resolved very easily. However, like I've mentioned in the like what has come out in the story, the government is getting it all wrong.
Okay.
It's we've been sending police in that area. This is not the first time. And speaking to them, they're not surprised. We're actually the ones who report this as if it's news. To them, this is not news. They've seen this before. We've lost many police officers in that area. Okay. And chances are we may see a repeat of the same if you're not careful on how we're going to handle this Pokot.
So to you, Dennis, it was searching for the answers that have never been...
searching for the answers from the men on the front line.
All right. Let me go to John, because this is not the only story we're showing you tonight that goes deep to find out the real cause. In the second part, we'll be telling you about End of the River. Also, an investigative report that goes deep and tries to tell you it begins from here. It starts from the beginning and not the end like we usually do. So let's go to John. This is something you have enjoyed over your time in the media. Reporting, going back and trying to find the reasons.
Well, I mean, with regard to Dennis's story, and good job in terms of getting access, it's very difficult to be able to get access to the Pokot specifically. I think Dennis is right. We, as media, and generally as a very Nairobi-centric, very urban-based and focused media, we forget that the conflicts that we see on the ground are motivated by people who think, people who have just as complex lives as we do, albeit in a different setting. So for instance, when a Pokot warrior tells you that they'll chamus tutawapiga tu kidogo and then now we sort each other out, that's sort of a signal that there's something that we're missing. I think the bigger story, especially in the northern parts of Kenya, that motivates conflict, at least from what we've been able to find out, is something that people often miss, which is population, right? In the northern parts of Kenya, in at least 5 counties, all right, the population growth rate, according to the last census, was at least 5%. That is 2% more than the national average. The national average is 3%. We grow at about 1 million babies a year. Now, you compare that in terms of population growth, and you have, as well as the last thing that the warrior said there, that they're not educated. That means that you have a huge population that only knows how to live and fend for themselves in 1 or 2 ways. Okay. Meaning that expansionism becomes a default mechanism from which they can, derive their livelihoods, get taken advantage of at some point by political leaders. But those kinds of pressures in that part of the country are really resource-based and, of course, motivated by, like Dennis said, the government completely missing the point, and in this case, taking one side over the other. And I mean, it's clear. And
that was a huge concern. Let me go to Robert, because this is also something you like doing, just not scratching the surface. You like going right the root of these problems.
Absolutely, but just let me just make a quick comment, and Dennis, I will definitely be watching. Just piqued my interest. I mean, brilliant job, absolutely.
Thank you.
The comment I'd like to make is, in any state, the monopoly of violence lies with the state. Now, in this case, they have failed miserably. Just how many guns did you see
Everyone had a gun.
Everybody has a gun. They're well armed to the teeth. And you've got to ask yourself, and in some cases we've been reading about some of the battles they've had with our security forces, which they've come on top. So there are many, many questions about the operations being carried out there that need to be answered. But just coming back to your question, I think there's one of two problems in my mind in newsrooms at the moment. And it's either laziness or the newsrooms simply have fallen into that box that we saw the American media fall into during the campaign period, where something breaks, you cover it, and then you move on to another big story immediately, without going into the nitty-gritty of what you were covering, essentially. And that is the big, big problem.
Okay.
And where, just very quickly, where we've had follow-ups, and I can comment on a couple of stories I've been reading very recently. The narrative suddenly takes a 360 turn, and you start wondering, hang on a second.
How did we get it wrong?
Are you is somebody trying to influence the story, or what just happened? Because you leave your audience very confused.
All right. Yeah. Let me go to Kiilu before we take a break. Looking from outside, all these guys here practice, but looking from outside, what have we been doing wrong with this?
Thanks, Ken. First of all, congratulations. I think for the first time, we're beginning to see the element or the high level of professional journalism that needs to be witnessed in this country. And I think in this case, Okari has done a great job. Because what is important for us is the lives and the safety of the citizens of Kenya. That's the most important thing. I think we cannot overrate that. The man who was talking, as you saw in the piece, the little teaser that we saw, was carrying an AK-47, which he was carrying in an expert manner, but he was talking about his children and the concern for the children. So he's thinking about his future generations.
He actually killed a snake to feed his children.
Yeah. So in this particular case, I think very much where we see the trend needing to go is we need to, like what Nagila has said, we need to move away from the US narrative of coming into an election period and just talking about the issues on the top, and we need to go to the root cause analysis. We need to have men and women who are brave enough to go in and give the true picture. Because even in security, unless we have the correct info or intel on the ground, we are failing miserably. So in this particular case, I think that's some very brave journalism, and we may consider you for an award in terms of that. But in the meantime, it's very, very important that we begin to develop the character and the culture of deep search journalism.
All right.
You know, we've gotten into this place where it's all about, you know, we call it now fake news. But it's not just fake news. I think there's a lot of what we can say doctored or engineered news that we see that's emerging. So guess what? The general populace has become bored. Media journalism has become tepid. It's not as exciting to see the 7 o'clock or the 9 o'clock news because somewhere inside you, your intuition. And you see, the difficulty with that is that the Kenyans, the common simple mwananchi, is interested in knowing the truth about what happened today in Kenya. It doesn't matter which part of Kenya it is. But number two, just before we move on, is we cannot forget that whatever we say here is being broadcast to the whole world. It's not just a local story. It's not just about that politician. The whole world takes an opinion immediately about whatever is said by media and by press in Kenya.
All right, so let's begin with John-Allan, because the next part of this, we are going to show you yet another story that is also displaying what we're talking about here. John.
All right, or you want me to talk about the story?
No, we go back to what we're discussing.
Okay, fine. Yes. Before we show that story, I think really what we're all saying here is encapsulated. I think it's either the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post's new motto. The world reacts, we analyze. That is exactly what news is supposed to be today. Because, let's be frank, the number of mobile phones in this country is going to grow phenomenally over the next couple of years, and it'll grow the same in Africa. I mean, the connectivity that we have today is really something that we couldn't even imagine even like 2-3 years ago, meaning that people are going to be able to understand the day-to-day events, or at least know about them within hours or even an hour, 30 minutes of them happening. What is the role of the journalist today? It's to make sense, especially of the things that matter. Now, what I see happening, by and large, not just here, but in newsrooms across the world, is that we get caught up in the day-to-day. I think there's a very brilliant short piece that AJ Plus did the other day. While the news machine was rolling on and on and on about Trump since he got into power, he had passed at least 2,000, was it about 2,000 bills? 2,000 bills that affect the daily lives of Americans, right? But nobody noticed that because we were all so fascinated about this huge marauding president who nobody is used to. And of course that's interesting, but really what value does it add to know that Donald Trump went golfing and blah, 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 other than knowing about, you know, things about his character that we already know about. So the key here is in terms of the mindset. Let me just quickly talk about Africa Uncensored. The reason why we started it is for us to be able to step away from that. So we don't cover day-to-day news. We don't cover current affairs. Or if we do, we take a perspective on it that at the very least is in-depth, that gives people a point of view that perhaps they didn't understand or need to understand better. That is the model for where newsrooms need to be if they're going to be able to survive in the current form. Otherwise, the fake news insult will be thrown at us and it'll stick more and more and more.
Robert?
I just want to add on to what John said, which is very, very interesting. Because the whole drama around Trump, the problem was the media was so fixated on every single thing he said and what the response was. And it's more or less a situation that's going on here 5 months to an election. He said, she said. No one's bothering. I mean, a politician will come up, say something, and then move on. No one's bothering to check whether that's a fact or not. And all you see in the headlines or in some of the stories that we watch on TV is, so-and-so said this, the response was that. I'll give an example. I don't know if I'm allowed to do that, but look at the Joho issue at the moment.
You're allowed.
You've got, and it's been a number of things over the last couple of weeks. Now you've got the whole thing about his examination papers, his school papers. That's come up. And everyone's busy reporting. He's been ordered to appear, these are fake. No one's bothered to actually go back, investigate, follow up on that.
This is an issue that has been around for about 3 years.
And this is the problem. This media, our media, our local media, we are all part of the problem. We're stuck in this. It's not just that story. It's the story.
But to be fair, Robert, sitting at the desk, what will the editor want to know? Would you want to discuss today or would you want to send a reporter? Because one, this is current. It's just happening. Look, why would you send me 2 days before and give a history of this?
It's not an excuse. That is absolutely not an excuse.
But that's what we're doing in the newsroom.
No, absolutely. But I think I was lucky enough when I was here. I had Juma, I had Joe Ageo, I had people like Alan supporting me in some of the stuff I was doing, whereby you've got, of course, the current stories, the big stories of the day. But you also have stories that you've been following up, which have an impact on society.
Okay.
It's not just enough to leave it hanging
somewhere.
Yet it affects quite a huge amount. Because our role in society, apart from keeping the government of the day in check, is also to provide information in a factual way.
I'd like to go to Dennis and Delano, but Namu, you have something.
Look, I mean, I just have to reinforce this. It is a mindset. It is a mindset.
Mindset that can be changed. Do you believe it can be changed?
Why is it that we are following, as in sound bites?
If you wake up tomorrow, John, for example, today we have had wiper meeting, we have the Joho certificate saga and the rest. When you wake up tomorrow and you look at the newspaper, would you want me to go back to Baringo or would you want to know what happened yesterday?
Look, you see, my viewpoint, of course, is different from other people because I perhaps have a different, interest in what is covered. But the truth of the matter is that everybody wants to be informed. It's like fast food. You go, you eat, after a few minutes, you're hungry again. Why? Because the food wasn't satisfying, wasn't nutritious. It's the value that you're giving to your consumer. Good way
to put it. I say Delano burning with something here.
You see, and I like what John-Allan and Nagila are saying here, but can I put it in a different way? Just to put it into context. Look at security in this country. There has never been a time, and I hope that will change, where we hear positive security reporting. It's always negative. It's always issue-based. It's always because some people died, some people were killed, or some people are about to be killed. We do not report on any good things or any good progress that is being made. And this is what we're begging the media. Guys, there are so many good stories that are happening in Kenya right now. Kenya has stood out in Africa as a real bastion for security for the entire continent. There is so much work that has been put in. There is so much progress that has been made in this country. We, thank God, since 2013, we have had no major attack in Nairobi or in Mombasa. And we've squeezed the balloon, we've pushed the bad guys to the perimeter. We don't talk about that. We only want to talk about when it is
when
mess,
something happens.
mess.
Yes.
And so there's an element where we need to start having what we can call balanced reporting. We're not saying, say everything is good. Just tell us the truth. Don't tell us everything is good.
The word is balance.
Balance.
Yes,
Balance.
It's balance.
It's balance.
I remember in school, my lecturer, the first lesson in journalism, he said, news is not when a dog bites a man. It's when a man bites a dog. Unfortunately, in the world of news today, it's bad news that sells. We don't have developing news that sells. Let's assume it's 9 o'clock. The first story you're watching is about some new crop system of growing maize, for example. How many people will be interested in watching that? It's important. It's very, very important. But news is driven by what people also demand to consume. There's research that has been done on this. What do people want to watch in the news? And who are the people watching the news anyway? Are they men? Are they women? What's the percentage? Do they want to watch politics? And there is this fascination in this country for politics, especially around this particular area, whereby it doesn't really matter how many sound bites you're putting into a story. People are fixated in watching insults. People want to watch those very extreme sound bites, and we are feeding people what essentially they want. That's what we've become, which again is unfortunate. To some degree, I agree. I tend to agree with what he says in terms of when we cover security stories. It's not always just the bad. How many police officers have been killed? But several times when we have attempted to do good stories, again you're labeled. You've been paid. There's an audience that will say, this is government propaganda, so-and-so has been paid. And it has happened. John, you've been accused of being paid because of doing a story that is skewed towards a certain direction. Nagila, the same. We all go through this. So there are pros and cons when you're approaching some of these stories.
Dennis, I'd like to ask you this. You sit on the desk. You're also an editor. You sit in the planning meetings. When you plan, what do you prioritize, for example? I have seen a couple of times NTV has pulled a fast on a lot of media houses by deciding to go with a feature, especially on Sundays. But when you sit on the desk, how do you prioritize what to show?
When editors say they're not the ones who are supposed to come up with the story ideas. Reporters are supposed to come from home in the morning, come up with a story idea, like what John was saying. It's not being sent to a press conference. You come, there's a NASA press conference, for example. So Ken Mijungu, you're going to cover this press conference. Now, it's up to you as the reporter to think the content you've actually been recording from that press conference when you come back to the desk. And this is the story. This is what they said. They said there's white smoke. They're going to announce the new leader. But it's up to you as the reporter to critically analyze and make sense of what this press conference is all about.
How much time? The press conference is at 8:30 p.m. News goes on air at 9.
It rarely happens at 8:30 p.m. Most times they will happen during the day. Politicians are too smart. They will always have the press conferences when they know to plan for that. There'll be time for the story to be aired at 1 p.m., at 7 p.m., and at 9 p.m. But what I'm trying to say is this. Robert said something very interesting, that there is laziness in the newsroom. And I tend to agree with that, because we used to have a crop of journalists who the likes of Juma, the likes of Linus Kaikai and Joage, and so many others who passed through these newsrooms, who did tremendous stories. And when you look at when you go back to the file footage and you watch their stories, you can see there was passion. They were passion driven in doing those kind of stories. Today, there's a lot of laziness in the newsroom. There's Facebook, there's Instagram, there's Twitter. Then we didn't have these things. So you hardly have enough time to digest the story that you're working on, because you want to post pictures, you want to take selfies, you want to do this, you want to do that. So you don't have enough time to digest the story, make sense of it. A lot of journalists don't read, unfortunately. They don't read books. Right. They don't basically take, for example, if you're doing health, be an expert in health. If you're doing education, be an expert, have the context, have everything. But you have journalists who will come, every contact is the editor who has to give them. It's laziness.
What you just said, and same thing is talking about right now, research. Very, very important. Unfortunately, and I don't know if the rest of the panel agrees with me, apart from what you're doing now, investigative journalism is dead in this country at a time when we needed it even more.
Okay.
Okay? And it's going to keep happening, especially closer to the election. I was listening on radio the other day where a politician basically said, oh no, the SGR, I'm just giving an example, the SGR is going to end somewhere in Naivasha in Uhuru's farm. And I think the other politician who was there as well walked out. He was not taking on those facts, and it's happening every single time. We had the president in Mombasa, for example, and he talked about Mombasa County, Joho, misusing, was it 40 billion to explain it?
Yeah.
Turns out both the president and the governor were wrong on their figures.
We got it right.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think I watched
right.
it. Yes, it was Larry who actually corrected the figure, but I didn't see it from anyone, and it just died there. No one followed up. Same thing with the water scandal we're seeing right now. The first report that was done on Wamalwa and his PS was absolutely brilliant. It answered a lot of questions. There was some research put into it. The second story has just thrown everything. It's like the narrative is being changed. And that is a real worry for the direction that journalism is moving at this particular moment.
All right, I'll give Kiilu a minute to sum this for us because we have to take another break.
I think really what Robert is saying over here is we need to get to the point where we go back. If we don't have people like journalists that are reading, then we need to at least give them the correct type of technology that they can enjoy and start learning how to do the research. And when they're coming up with the figures and the facts, remember the audience that we're talking to is very informed nowadays because of Google, because of Twitter, because of whatever, Instagram, Snapchat.
Well, informed or opinionated.
They are opinionated. Let's call it opinionated. Yeah. They're very opinionated. But if you're able to bring out the truth, and truth is not very difficult to bring out in terms of analysis, I think the newsrooms need to invest in the correct type of technology, if you ask me, that is going to give correct analysis. If you can actually buy the correct type of analysis, software and equipment, and get the guys to learn how to do a proper analysis on any news story. But the second thing that is out there is there's a lot of knee-jerk type of journalism nowadays. We don't see that extension going on a day beyond the hot news story that appeared the day before. We see the very next day that story has been killed. Somebody has started another scandal on this side. It's all
basically move on.
It's getting very foggy. It's getting very foggy in here. I think we need to start investigating what's going on with journalism in the newsrooms.
All right, okay, we have to take a break. Investing because I mean Robert, even John and myself, you know, having this experience internationally, newsrooms how they operate. You have a news producer. Beyond the editor or the managing editor who will look at the whole structure of how the news will look like, you have producers who are basically assigned to you. So what's the story? The story is, for example, the SGR. So if the producer who helps you come up with research comes up with the hard questions that you're going to ask in the interview that you've already booked, by the time you come back to script your story, the producer again looks at your story, you fact check a lot of things before you go to voice it and put pictures and put the content out on TV. Locally, we have not done enough investments in terms of hiring news producers who will work with reporters, even those ones who are weak, because we all don't have the same strengths, and help out and prop these reporters in coming up with a brilliant report. We lack that kind of investment in our local newsrooms.
All right, on that note, we take a short break, but I'd like to read this tweet by @Gadara. There are two tweets. The first one, he says, something being current does not mean that it is important or valuable. And then the second one, he's asking, what is the balanced story about security? And what will be a balanced story about Westgate, for example? Very pertinent questions. I think, Dennis, you spoke about this. So he's asking that question. We'll try to answer it in the last part of Press. And of course, on the other side of the break, we'll also be talking about End of the River. Stay with us. Of course, we continue with our discussions here. First, though, let's talk about End of the River. Next week, Africa Uncensored, True Award-winning investigative reporter John-Allan Namu, who is here on our panel tonight, will be attempting to explain the reason for drying rivers that are responsible for the perennial drought in some parts of the country. This will be the first time a journalist is not reporting the end, but taking us to the beginning of this problem. Here is a sneak preview of End of the River by John-Allan Namu.
My name is John-Allan Namu. I'm a Kenyan investigative reporter, and I'm on a journey. I want to understand the story behind the drying up river and the conflict that comes when the river ends.
I will fight with a panga, with a spear, with my own teeth. No day I will live here.
For a long time now in Kenya, we've seen reports of the effects of drought in some of the driest parts of our country.
Hapa ndio shida ya nyasi tu.
Tunang'ang'ana na borana sangina maji hapo.
In 2015 alone, 310 people were killed in intertribal clashes in northern Kenya.
Najua jana wamechukua ng'ombe ya borana. Kore, Samburu. Wamechukua jana.
Ndio yote yalalishwa. Kwa sababu ikihalalishwa tutajua ni nani ndio ameiba na bunduki.
While there are men of my age, men who are younger than me, who can be part of the conflict, are there, they killed a mother of 82.
Those deaths, I don't think are going to go unpunished, at least from the point of view of that community.
Hiyo pia inaweza toka kwa hati yangu mpaka nikufe.
All right, let's begin with John. What motivated you, for example, to look at the source of the problem and not really at the end?
Because, and we covered this from Isiolo and we're going down into Laikipia, it's about a 3-4 part series. Because 8 years ago, exactly at the time we started this story, I was in Isiolo covering the conflict between the Samburu and the Borana at the end of El Nino and the La Nina period, right? And at that time, I was doing basically what was happening in the newsroom. You cover the conflict, you cover the deaths, you tell that story, and you move on. And you try and be in depth. So 8 years later, we go back, we try and analyze what exactly are the problems. You see, because it can't be that every drought season people fight and we just leave it as that, as a fact of life, because it happens in a part of the country that we don't understand. And what we find there is both surprising but also not surprising. It's a point that I had made earlier. When you look at the amount of people that have grown up in northern Kenya now, and I'm applying this based on the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics census data, right? If a part of the country is growing at 5%, 6% in some areas, like for instance, Turkana is exactly double the national average growth rate, right? And the people there do not have education, do not have access to other means of being able to lead either sedentary lifestyles or a way to graduate from pastoralism, which actually is a very profitable and good way of being able to lead a life. I'm not saying that it's a bad way. Then you will have what happens in Dennis's story. Dennis, he was talking during the break about the level of education there, saying that in Pokot, it's somewhere in the high 90s of people who do not have education. What does education do in a setup like you? I'll just give a small example, all right? You're educated, you get married, you want your children to become educated. Therefore, it means that you can't have as many children as you'd want to because education costs money, all right? That kind of growth path and that kind of life path requires a certain amount of planning that you get through education, yeah? So the benefit of better healthcare, the benefit of being closer to some resources has now ensured that these populations can grow, but resources are finite, and without education, management of grasslands is something that people will not take up or not understand. But there are beautiful examples of where this has worked, where we have invested in the communities there. In the Maasai, for instance, I think are one of the best examples of how you can be able to graduate your lifestyles and make pastoralism profitable. So, in short, we went to the beginning of the story. We started filming this story in September. We stopped in maybe about early January before taking a break and going back. And it's really, it unfolds over time and you start to understand really the context
in which this story happens is something that happens over and over and over again. We just miss it because we're looking for the bodies, we're looking for the hot news, and we move on from there.
We forgot to do the most important part.
Exactly.
And the biggest danger with that is, like, I keep going back, we've got five months to an election, okay? We keep going on down this route of he said, she said. We're going to get to the elections, and you're going to have to contend with alternative facts, which we've already seen are coming up already. And that's one of the headaches that the government is facing. How are they going to deal with that? Especially when the tallying has begun and you're getting conflicting information and you've got a group of people out there. And this is partly because there are no follow-up stories. You've got a huge group of people, especially among the youth. There was a study the other day that just came out saying that more than, I think, is it 60% of the youth now look to social media for as avenues for news, because the traditional media is basically losing that trust amongst a lot of people. And if you can't sort out that problem immediately, it's going to get worse, because when you do follow-up stories, it also strengthens your brand, because you've got people trusting you more as well, and they believe in you. That's one of the reasons, I believe, why the nation carries that caption, the truth. Okay, because for a long time they were known to that, but there was also this perception that the media, especially when this administration came in, that the media had gone into bed with them. That was thrown out of the window. You remember the Galava episode and all those things that were happening around, and a lot of people out there felt that the government had squeezed the media to get rid of certain people they did not like. That was left hanging up. There were no proper explanations given out. And I think at times as well, media houses have a responsibility to come out very clearly on such things. But for a reporter, follow-up, research, very, very important. Otherwise, you lose your audience.
Okay.
Look, Kero, I think at the end of the day, you know, Robert's brought out one of the most important points. If there's anything we needed to go home with from here today, it is the youth bulge in Kenya. The youth bulge is not going to go away. We have a huge population. It's training everything, our natural resources, the budget, etc. Most of all, at the end of the day, if we're trying to drive a middle-class economy, these guys are going to grow up, finish school, and not have jobs. Yeah? They're not going to have a vocation. And they don't want to be pastoralists because you taught them to be somebody else. So we have to look at those very large, big problems, and we really need media to come to the fore to say, because that is what is going to provide what we call development security. Some of the ways that we counter radicalization and stuff like that is by actually solving the problem before it begins. That's why we have to go into very deep root cause analysis. And by far and large, Kenya has produced the greatest journalists on this planet. They're sucked up by international media stations all over the world. There is no reason why today, in 2017, Kenya should not be leading from the forefront domestically in terms of the best journalism, the best practice, etc. So what it is really a challenge. I mean, us guys have to throw the gauntlet and say, you know, as much as you guys have toiled and struggled and it's taken time, we still need more from you. And again, you can't pass the buck. I mean, as much as you want to say John-Allan and Robert, you pass the buck, the editor, no, you can't. You have to actually go back to yourself and say, let's fix this problem for the sake of the Kens of this world who are still, you know, down in the doldrums, and let's get those stories out. Let's do what needs to be done. But at the end of the day, it's again about leadership. It is about trust. Because if the general public does not trust what the newspaper is going to say, who's going to buy that paper? If we don't trust what we're going to see on 9 o'clock news, who will listen to that news? Nobody's going to listen to that. So we have to come back to the root before. You know, if we went back 20, 30 years ago, 1 o'clock news was 1 o'clock news. People waited for that 1 o'clock news because you knew that 1 o'clock news is decisive. Yeah. This 1 o'clock news is news.
That has changed. And Dennis, from where you sit, most of the tweets I look at here touching on the kind of coverage and the reasons why we provide such coverage. And they're talking about media houses also being compromised. We're talking about reporters and correspondents getting compromised and being in bed with the news sources. For example, is that the motivation why you did not interview any news source?
To answer that question, I'll say a couple of things. In terms of the structure of the newsroom, what we have today, we have docket stories. You come up in the morning, the diary is full. You've got 15 press conferences. You have 4 or 5 reporters that day. I mean, as an editor, what do? All the assignments have to be covered. If you're going to cover Jubilee and not cover NASA, NASA will write letters. They will accuse you of not giving them balanced coverage as you're giving Jubilee. There are so many dynamics that play around this. However, in terms of covering some of these stories and compromise, we've had Media Council have handled these complaints before, and people have accused us of being biased or being paid to push certain individuals and agendas. And like Namu said, everyone is opinionated in this country. Everyone, most people are actually experts when they're watching news. They know what's going on. They know this and that. However, the problem that we also seem to be having, apart from intimidation, obviously, from especially from the correspondents in the regions where, you know, everyone knows where you stay. It's a small village or it's a small town. So if you attempt to do a negative story on this politician, I mean, they will threaten you. And we are seeing more threats and more threats every day.
Not even a negative story, the real story, the true story about someone.
Now, going to the real story, here's the other thing. The newsrooms, like you said, we need to invest. One of the things that we don't do, and Namu mentioned that working on that story took you how many months? You started September? September, and then you took a break January. But you've covered that same story in the same region in terms of being in the news, and you've only been reporting facts. This happened, this and this happened, but now you have enough time to cover. We need to invest in covering this story and doing follow-ups. One, it requires money. Secondly, it requires a lot of patience. Not so many newsrooms can accommodate someone who will follow up just one story for 8 months. I know international media houses that can give you even up to 2 years to just follow a single story. But what you get, and you will travel all over the place, do enough research, but what you come up with is so solid, it shakes the entire world. In the newsroom, we lack that today. We're not patient enough to grow stories or to develop stories. We are quick to cover the stories for today. Tomorrow, let's find out what's in the diary. We cover that for tomorrow, and then the week is over. Then we jump again to the following. So there's no time, there's no real investment in doing these follow-ups in depth and investigating the real causes and making sense of the stories.
Can I just make a point about that? And this is something that I was talking about over the break. There is a place for live news. There's a place for a daily bulletin that covers or rehashes what happens, because that's how people consume news, or that's how people have consumed news. But, and I'll go back to this, there is exactly what Dennis is talking about. Sometimes it's not really even in terms of investment, Dennis. It's really just design thinking. Design your newsroom to think around what the problems are, what the society wants to be able to respond to, and change. Change is difficult. The truth of the matter is, our newsrooms in this country are too top heavy. And I'll say this, you know, at the risk of being pelted with all sorts of insults saying that people should lose their jobs. They're too top heavy with people who do too much of the wrong thing. You understand? So you have a barrage of reporters who are just doing live or daily news coverage when they should be doing what it is that they're interested in. You're right. And that's how newsrooms should grow, because the truth of the matter, and let's all admit this to ourselves, we cannot and will not cover everything. Mm-hmm. We can't. We cannot be all things to everybody at every moment of the day. Pick your battles. Win those battles, and you will see what will happen in the future.
And just quickly before you move on, I just want to, and it goes back to something he's touched on and what you said as well, that at the end of the day, it also comes down to the journalist, okay, and the kind of passion that you have. And I'm just going to throw this out there before you move on. Last week, this goes up on the follow-up again, we had the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga claim that the country has just taken a loan from the United Arab Emirates. I think the figure was about 28 billion, was it? Well, today, I was at Treasury at a press briefing by the Cabinet Secretary, Rotich, and he said, although he kind of dismissed it as well, but he said, listen, I don't know what that is about, because we have not taken any loan from the United Arab Emirates. Okay? Now, is that going to be fact-checked? Are people going to look into this? That remains to be seen. But it's not just that. There's so many other examples.
Okay. Gentlemen, we have to end this, and in no particular order. I'd like to begin with Dennis. How do we move this conversation forward, and how do we, going forward, because I'm sure our newsrooms are watching, how do we then ensure that day-to journalism still exists in this country?
For me, it will be three things quickly. One is a mindset change. We need, like everyone else has been saying on this panel, we need a mindset change, not just with reporters only, but even with the editors and how we structure our news and what we think the public or the consumer needs to feed on. Secondly, we need to invest. We cannot run away from this. We need to invest at a time when, you know, we are cutting costs, at a time when newsrooms are firing people and so on and so forth. You are having 1,000 events. You have only a handful of reporters. Reporters are also burdened, I'll be very honest with you, with covering daily events when, like Namu said, they're not concentrating in what they're passionate about. You have reporters who have a medicine background, who would want to venture into, you know, health reporting. But you throw this reporter to do politics, something they're not passionate about. They have no institutional knowledge on anything about politics in this country. They'll just give you what they will get on that day. So we need to invest in knowledge. We need to invest in research. We need to invest also in terms of equipping journalists in our newsrooms, hiring producers to help produce news and give the rich content to the consumer, because we have Twitter, we have Instagram, we have Facebook. Before 1 o'clock, actually before 7 o'clock, you can almost predict what is going to be on the news. Everybody is on Twitter. Everybody knows what has gone on in the country, including my uncle deep in the village in Kisii. He knows what's going to be in the news. So we're talking about people who are more knowledgeable. People are very smart nowadays. They can be able to tell that this is biased or this is not biased. So we need to invest in technology as well to keep up with the pace of what the changing world that we have around us.
Right, Delano.
I'll go after that. I think there are three things that need to happen. The first is passion. We need the passion that is here on this particular legendary bench to come out. That passion for journalism, that passion for reporting the truth, that passion for going and digging down deep. We need that passion to come back. The second thing is pride. We need to have the pride of journalism. The pride to be a world-class journalist needs to come back, even to the very young guys, even to the novices. That pride has to come back. They have to be able to look up at people who have gone before them. And the last thing is possibilities. We need to see the media actually come back into that place of possibilities. In security, we say you cannot just do a 180 or a 360. You cannot just look at a two-dimensional aspect and then give a report on that, an intel on that. In our sphere, we actually look at the whole 720 degrees because we're concerned about what might come at us from the air or from even below the ground. We have to do the full 720. So let's look at all the possibilities. And going into your report, Okari, that is exactly what you did. You went in and looked at what are all the possibilities? What are all the angles on this? Possibilities. That's my final say.
All right, Robert.
2 points. Number one, to the media houses. Pay the journalists well. Number one, pay them well. Because I'm still trying to understand this cycle we always go through every year, where when we get towards half the year, media houses always seem to let off or let go quite a number of journalists and then rehire again at a much cheaper and pay them much cheaper. Okay? And now you have a lot of journalists who say, you know, what's the point? Let me go into PR, let me go to something else. Pay your journalists well. You're investing so much in this whole operation, but the people who are vital to this operation, working as it should, really don't feel as if they're part of it. Number two is more of a warning. I'm going to get back to, and I'm really worried about this because 5 months to an election, we don't seem to have gotten our act together, and we risk alternative news actually taking over as fact. So we need to be very careful this part. And what's going to happen eventually, I know we've had from the ICT CS, and he said, look, it's not our intention. We're not going to restrict social media or anything during the election. But what happens when you get to that stage? And listen, they don't have any other tools to fight this. They will have to, if they feel it threatens the very fabric of society, the security of the country, they will shut it down. And the media will be partly responsible for that. So we need to get our act together right now before it's too late. 5 months is not a long time.
Okay, and finally, John.
I mean, when I reflect about this, I think a lot about the reasons why I left, mainstream journalism. And, call it what you want. Call it being foolish, call it whatever. But
foolish, I'll never put you in that category, but go on.
But my colleagues and I had a vision about being able to tell stories that mattered, and stories that just weren't driven by hashtags and driven by day-to-day coverage. So my one answer on the one hand is just be brave enough to do that, all right? We might fail. Our experiment might fail. John-Allan Namu might be in the gutter tomorrow, but at least I'll have attempted that. Now, the second point that I will make, and I keep coming back to this, is about mindset, all right? We are here discussing this issue that has been discussed over and over again, not just now in the age of social media, mind you, but in the age of Woodward and Bernstein, in the age of Macharia Gaido and the Weekly Review. These were all attempts to address what exactly is happening now, where you're trying to give people context, content, change your mindset. And finally, it's something that your managing editor, who is now general manager, I believe, Linus Kaikai, used to tell all of us, have testicular fortitude. If you know what I mean. Yeah, to be politically correct. And this is no offense to people who think that this might be dirty, but I mean, we're past the watershed period. I think it's big boys and girls who are watching now. Have testicular fortitude. Go after the stories that matter, for Pete's sake. Don't compete with Twitter. Don't compete, because you will lose every time. The New York Times, Wall Street Journal, all of these guys are showing us that with great analysis, with better day 2 reporting, you can actually make a go of it and become successful. And as Delano said, we are not here because we are dumber than them. By the way, we are the same. We bleed the same, we think the same, our lives are just as complex, and we have the same technology. It is just in the application. Have the testicular fortitude to go after that. I think that I'll just stop there.
A good way to sum it up. I don't think after that I'll be able to say anything more potent than that.
You can add on that.
Thank you very much.